G'day guys, and welcome back to Up to Speed with Elasticsearch. We are at chapter 6. In the last video we looked at mutations, so we explained and demonstrated how to add data to an Elasticsearch index either individually or in bulk, how to make updates to data in Elasticsearch, and how to delete records in Elasticsearch. And we're going to continue down a similar vein today with ingest pipelines. Don't worry too much if you've never heard of an ingest pipeline before. I don't think I've ever really heard this phrase outside of Elasticsearch, but we're going to define that very soon. So an ingest pipeline, at least this is my definition. It's certainly not a definition that I've read in the Elasticsearch documentation anywhere, but if you ask me, hey, what's an ingest pipeline? I'd probably say it's a way of transforming the data that is added to an index. So to elaborate on that a little bit, imagine you save a document to an index in Elasticsearch and it has 5 fields in it. An ingest pipeline is a way for you to apply one or more transformations to those 5 fields, either removing fields, adding additional fields, so add field 6 or 7, or just applying general transformations to the data. You can enrich a document with extra information, or you can remove things or modify things. And it's a pipeline because it's a series of transformations, and the transformations run in the order that you define them. So that's why they're referred to as a pipeline. To give you a semi-practical example, imagine you've got an index that contains login audits. So every time somebody logs into an application, some paper trail from that login gets written to an Elasticsearch index. Maybe it gets reviewed from time to time. So you can kind of see a series of steps in the slide here. Step 1 is a document gets saved. Your application saves login attempts to your index. So this would just be a simple put, index name /_doc/ the ID of the login attempt. And we've seen how to do this in the previous video. But step 2 is something that happens automatically behind the scenes, and this is where an ingest pipeline would allow you to do something like this. So maybe we want to extract a location from an IP address, for example. So you'd be looking at retrieving some information like lat long, country name, city name, and things like that from an IP address. This is something that an ingest pipeline can help you with. It's not magic. It is using like a GeoIP database that is stored inside of Elasticsearch, if I'm not wrong. But yeah, an ingest pipeline can save you from having to add that application logic to your application code. Elasticsearch can perform that behind the scenes in an ingest pipeline. Maybe you want to do a few other things as well, like maybe you want to extract some user agent information like the browser and the operating system and store that in additional fields. So you might have a user agent field, which is going to be this massively long string that isn't particularly well formatted, and it's not particularly easily searchable. Maybe you want to break up that user agent field into a number of subfields. So that you can say, find me all login attempts where Chrome was the browser, or this particular Macintosh was the browser, or something like that. Again, this could be another step in your ingest pipeline. And once all of the steps in the ingest pipeline have completed, then the document gets persisted and it's available for search and retrieval. So in a nutshell, that's kind of ingest pipelines. And understandably, they'll make a lot more sense once you actually see them. So let's actually go ahead and complete some tasks. So we don't have too many, but we do have a nice practical example, similar to the example that we've talked about earlier. I'm just going to copy these tasks and paste them into Kibana, as I usually do, so we can spend our time in Kibana. Okay, so step 1 is we want to create an ingest pipeline for enriching the Apache logs index. geolocation should be populated from the client IP, and the user agent should be expanded into a nested object. So it's pretty much the exact same steps that we've discussed here. So if they sounded interesting to you, we're going to demonstrate exactly how to perform these steps. Maybe before anything, I'll just review the Apache logs index. All right, so we've got this agent field here that looks like a user agent, but as said, it's not particularly well formatted. You could probably do like a full text search to get some stuff out of here, like since Chrome is separated by a space and a slash, this should end up being its own token in the inverted index. So you should be able to do a full text search on that. But it'd be much nicer to just do like a term query and say find me every request that was made by a Chrome browser without having to do a full text search. So that's a user agent, and we also have a client IP field down the bottom here. We want to expand that into all sorts of geolocation information around that client IP. So I'll bring up the documentation for ingest pipelines. This is basically how you create a pipeline. So we run a put request to ingest/pipeline and give the pipeline an ID or a name. And there's this processes array here, which accepts one or more processes. And the processes basically correspond to these steps that we mentioned earlier. So the actual processes, you can check the documentation for those. For some reason, they're not in the same section in the documentation. You have to search for them separately. But here's basically the list of processes that Elasticsearch supports as of version 7.10. Likely this list is expanding as new versions get added, but this is what we have at version 7.10. I'm not going to explain all of them. Feel free to have a look and see if any of them are of interest to you. But as of this video, we're going to be looking at two. The first is this GeoIP processor, and the second is this user agent processor to do what we need to do. So let's go ahead and create those, create that ingest pipeline. So I'm going to do a post. Is it a post or a put? No, let's put to ingest/pipeline/ the name of the pipeline. This is fairly specific-ish to logs, but I imagine if you had logs from another web server like Nginx or IIS, you could potentially reuse the same pipeline. So I might just call this like web logs. It's going to have a description, process web logs, and extract IP fields and user agent fields. You can give these a version, since as time goes on you may modify this and add or remove or tweak the different processes in the pipeline. I'm just going to set it to version 1, and of course we're going to have a list of processes. So the first processor that we want is this geolocation processor. So there should be a GeoIP processor that we can add. Again, you can always refer to the documentation here for extra information. The field that we're going to be looking at is the client IP field, which is this one here. And we're also going to need to specify a target field, which is the field to put the expanded object to. So it's going to take this IP and turn it into this object with stuff like lat long, country name, and so on. So it's going to create a new field. We need to specify the name of that new field. And I'm just going to call it geo. The second step in our pipeline is going to expand the user agent. So that's going to come off this agent field here. The pipeline that we want to use here is the user agent pipeline. So if I start typing user agent, that looks good. Again, the field is going to be the agent field here. And similarly, we need to tell it where to actually put the enriched data. I'm going to call this maybe user underscore agent. And as far as the pipeline goes, I think that looks good. All right, that's acknowledged. And if we want to just give it a very quick test, we can retrieve it. Ingest pipeline web logs. Here it is. Okay, cool. So that looks good. And I think task 1 is looking good. Task 2 is to actually test the ingest pipeline. So a really cool feature around pipelines, which I believe we saw a couple weeks ago with custom analyzers, is the ability to like simulate a request and test how an analyzer, or in this case a pipeline, is going to behave with a given document. So we'll do a post ingest pipeline simulate. I believe we should throw the ID of the pipeline in here and then call simulate. And then we want docs is going to be an array of documents. We're going to have an underscore source property, which is going to contain the actual fields of the document. And just to give this a fair test, let's take, say, the first document, pretty much. So all this stuff here, and we'll see how the ingest pipeline is going to produce something based off of this input. And let's auto indent this, and let's simulate it. Okay, so we can see down here we've got this geo object, which contains continent name and city name and location. That was populated based off of the client IP. And we've also got this user underscore agent field, which contains the name, the OS, the device, and the version. And all of that information is being pulled off of the agent field, which is up the top here. So I think that's looking pretty good. Task 2 regarding testing, I think is looking good. Task 3, we want to reindex the Apache logs so that the existing data gets enriched by the new pipeline. So all of this, like these two new fields, user agent and geo, should be applied to all of the existing documents inside of Apache logs. Now, you may have noticed that there's going to be a slight problem here because we're adding two new fields, geo and user agent, and they're kind of being added by the pipeline. That's going to cause a problem because we have dynamic mapping turned off in the Apache logs index. If I just do a quick retrieval of the mapping, we can see here we've got dynamic set to strict, and as we've seen earlier in the video series, this setting basically means that only fields that the index already has a mapping for, in other words, all of these fields here, are allowed to be saved. And because the ingest pipeline is going to result in two new fields, it's basically not going to be able to save any documents because those two new fields don't have a mapping. Now, the kind of annoying thing around these two fields is that they're nested objects, so it's going to take a fair while for us to put together a mapping for like not only those two fields but also each of the subfields. So what I'm just going to do for the moment is to turn off that strict setting for the mapping, just because I don't want this video to go on forever, which it likely will be if I have to add a mapping for each of these. So I'm just going to turn dynamic mapping off. If this was like a production system that I'm building, like I'm building something that is actually going to be deployed to production, I just invest the time in doing this. But for the sake of the video, I'm going to take a little shortcut. So what we're going to do is we're going to update the mapping to turn off dynamic mapping just for now. So let's do a put of Apache logs underscore mapping, and I'm going to set dynamic to true, and that should turn on dynamic mapping. So let's save this, it gets acknowledged, let's retrieve it back, and we can see dynamic is set to true. So that sounds good. What we want to do then is we can go ahead and reindex the Apache logs so all the existing data gets enriched. Let's say we don't actually need to do a reindex here because we're not because we can just reindex the data in place. We've only because we've set dynamic to true, we don't need to create a whole new index with a new mapping or anything like that. We can just reindex the data or repopulate the data as it is. In fact, we did have to do this in the homework exercise a couple weeks ago. If you guys want to take a moment to recall how we did that, how we populated existing data based off of a new setting or a new mapping or something like that, or in this case an ingest pipeline, feel free to pause the video while you try to recall how to do that. Basically, we can use an update by query. I'm going to do Apache logs update by query. There we go. And what you can actually do here is you can specify a pipeline. And this is going to be the name of an ingest pipeline. So the pipeline we're going to use is weblogs. And we're just going to leave the body empty. So normally you could include a query here, and you could include a script here to perform some batch update, as we saw in the previous video, kind of like an update set, etc., where, and your where would be similar to your query. But we want to apply this to literally everything in the index, so we're not going to include any body. So let's go ahead and run this. Cool. And now let's go ahead and do our search on the Apache logs. Cool. So we can see we've got this geo field here, and we've got the user agent field, and that all looks like it's working well. There is still one potential problem though, which is we've gone and done this update by query. So we've updated all of the existing data in the index so that it ran through this pipeline. But what about for new data that comes into the index? How do we get new data that comes into the index to leverage the pipeline? There's two ways to do this. One is we could include the pipeline doc, let's just say one. We could include the pipeline when we index a document. So trying to remember the syntax for this, but let me just look it up. Document APIs. That looks good. And if I just search for pipeline, this is going to be in the query parameters. Okay, so similarly to what we did with update by query, we can also specify a pipeline here, and whenever we index a document, it's going to run this pipeline on the document. That is a little annoying though, and it's easy to forget this, especially if you're updating documents or you're indexing documents in different ways. You can set the pipeline to be a default on the index. If we check out the index settings, this is basically the settings object that lives on the index. There is a default underscore pipeline setting on the index. So we're going to go ahead and add that. So what we can do is we can say put Apache underscore logs settings index dot default underscore pipeline, and we're going to set this to web underscore logs and run this, and that gets acknowledged. If we then retrieve the Apache logs settings, we can see we've got the default pipeline coming back in the settings, as well as the number of shards and number of replicas. So that's all looking good. Just on this note of updating the settings without creating a whole new index, as the documentation says, you've kind of got like two categories of, wrong page. You've kind of got two categories of pages. You've got static, two categories of settings, sorry. You've got static settings. These can only be set when you create the index, and dynamic settings. dynamic settings you can change without having to create a whole new index. But for stuff that's static, such as the number of primary shards, if you do want to change this, you have to create a new index and move all your data over, as we've seen in previous videos. But thankfully, the default pipeline is a dynamic setting. We can change it in place, and we didn't have to create a whole new index to do that. So what I might do just as a last little operation is I'm going to save a new document to the Apache logs index, and then we'll make sure that that new default pipeline setting is taking effect. So if I do a search, this all comes out. Let me just copy this, and I'm going to do a put to Apache logs doc 1. Paste this in, and I'm going to remove the geo field, and I'm going to remove the user agent field. I think that looks good. Let's auto indent this and run it. Great. And if I then retrieve that document, we can see it has the geo field and it has the user agent field. So hopefully that was a reasonably practical demo of ingest pipelines. If you do have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks a lot. Bye.